I didn't block the road when they first drove across my land. I didn't stop them when the second car followed, or the third, or the steady line of SUVs and pickup trucks that started cutting through my backyard like it had always belonged to them. No, I waited, because I wanted them to get comfortable. I wanted it to become normal. I wanted the entire neighborhood, and more importantly, the HOA, to believe that what they were doing wasn't just acceptable, but permanent. So when I finally shut it down, I didn't just block a road. I broke their system. And the timing? That was the best part. I waited until the busiest evening of the year, when everyone was already running late, when tempers were short, when the entire community depended on that shortcut more than they were willing to admit. That's when I closed it. And within minutes, chaos did exactly what I knew it would do. But to understand how it got there, you need to understand one thing. This wasn't an accident. This was built, piece by piece, right in front of me, on my land, and they thought I wouldn't do anything about it. My name is Daniel Cross. I'm 46 years old, and I've lived in this countryside estate long enough to know how people like Patricia Vaughn operate. If you're watching this, let me know where you're tuning in from. I always find it interesting how far these stories travel, and if you've ever dealt with an HOA that thought it owned more than it should, you might want to stick around, and maybe hit like or subscribe if this hits close to home. Because what happened here didn't start with a road. It started with a lie. The first time I noticed it, it was subtle. A single tire track cutting across the far edge of my property, not near the house, not even close to the main driveway, way out near the tree line where my land sloped slightly toward the neighboring properties. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. Someone took a wrong turn, maybe a delivery driver trying to shave off a few seconds. It happens. I didn't think much of it until it happened again and again. And then one morning, while I was standing on my porch with a cup of coffee, I saw it clearly. A black SUV, one of those oversized luxury ones, slow down near the edge of the HOA-maintained road, pause, and then turn directly onto my land like it was following a path that already existed. No hesitation, no confusion, just routine. I didn't wave, I didn't shout, I just watched. Because people tell you everything you need to know by how confidently they do something they shouldn't be doing. That driver didn't look like someone taking a shortcut. They looked like someone who had permission. That's when I started paying attention. Over the next few days, I adjusted my routine, spent more time outside, took longer walks along the perimeter of my property, and what I saw confirmed exactly what I suspected. It wasn't random, it was consistent. Cars entering from one side, exiting through another, shaving off a clean 2 to 3 minutes from the main road loop that curved unnecessarily around the estate. A shortcut, not an official one, not a legal one, but a very efficient one. And people were using it, a lot. Now here's the part most people would react to. They'd put up a sign, block the path, call the HOA, start a confrontation. I didn't do any of that, because I wanted to see how far they'd take it. About a week later, I got my answer. A letter showed up, not in my mailbox, but taped to my front door. No envelope, no formality, just a printed notice with the HOA letterhead. Temporary Emergency Access Notice. I read it twice. According to the letter, due to ongoing road maintenance on one of the main internal routes, the HOA had authorized a temporary emergency access path for residents to ensure safety and mobility within the community. And according to them, that access point just happened to run across my land. No signature, no prior discussion, no permission requested, just declared. I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. Patricia Vaughn didn't ask for things. She created situations where asking became irrelevant. I'd seen it before. Small rule changes, quiet adjustments, things that seemed temporary until they weren't. And once people got used to them, reversing it became inconvenient. And inconvenience, in a place like this, was enough to justify almost anything. So I didn't respond to the letter. I didn't call, didn't email, didn't even acknowledge it existed. Instead, I watched. And right on schedule, the pattern changed. The traffic increased. The path became more defined. Grass flattened. Dirt packed down. What used to be tire tracks started looking like an actual route. Then came the markers. Small wooden stakes at first, barely noticeable unless you were looking for them. Placed just enough to guide vehicles, without drawing too much attention. That's when I knew this wasn't temporary. This was phase 1. A few days later, I took a walk along the edge of the path. Slow, deliberate, like I had nowhere else to be. And that's when I saw it, a small sign, white, clean, professional, emergency access route, authorized use only. Authorized by who? That part wasn't mentioned. Of course it wasn't, because saying it out loud would make it real, and making it real would require permission, something they didn't have. I stood there for a moment, just looking at it. Then I looked at the path. Then at the steady stream of cars using it like it had always been there. And for the first time, I understood exactly what Patricia was doing. She wasn't building a road. She was building acceptance, because once everyone believed it existed, all she had to do was make it official. And by then, stopping it wouldn't just be inconvenient. It would be a problem, a big one, for everyone. That night, I went back inside, sat down at my desk, and pulled out something I hadn't looked at in years. My property documents, surveys, boundary maps, everything. Not because I didn't know where my land ended, but because I wanted to see how they might try to argue that it didn't. And that's when I noticed something interesting. There was a narrow strip along the edge of my property, technically mine, but positioned in a way that made it very tempting for anyone trying to connect two internal roads. A perfect shortcut, if you ignored ownership or planned to rewrite it later. I leaned back in my chair, and for the first time since this started, I wasn't just observing anymore. I was planning. Because if Patricia thought this would stay temporary, she was about to find out what happens when you build something on the wrong land, in front of the wrong person, and more importantly, at the wrong time. Because I wasn't going to stop them. Not yet. I was going to let them finish. I didn't slow them down. That's the part people usually don't understand. They hear a story like this and assume I must have tried to stop it early, made a call, filed a complaint, put up a barrier. I didn't. In fact, I did the opposite. I made it easier. Not in any obvious way, nothing that could be traced back to me, but I stopped walking near that section of land, stopped being visible, stopped giving anyone a reason to think I was paying attention. Because when people feel unobserved, they accelerate. And Patricia Vaughn? She was already moving faster than most. Within 2 weeks of that emergency access notice, the change was impossible to ignore. The dirt path wasn't just compacted anymore. It was leveled. Not professionally. Not yet, but enough that even lower cars could pass through without hesitation. No more careful turns, no more slowing down, just smooth, confident driving, like it belonged to them. And the traffic? It doubled. Morning hours became predictable streams of vehicles cutting through my land like it was part of their daily commute. Evenings were worse. People coming home, tired, impatient, looking for the fastest way back to their driveways. And now they had one, through mine. I started noticing something else, too. Familiarity. Drivers weren't just using the path, they were expecting it. You could see it in how they approached the turn. No hesitation, no checking, just an assumption that the path would be there, open, ready. That's when I knew Patricia had crossed into phase 2, normalization. I kept watching. One afternoon, I saw her, Patricia Vaughn, standing near the edge of the path, dressed exactly how you'd expect. Perfectly pressed blazer, sunglasses, posture straight like she was inspecting something she owned. She wasn't alone. 2 other board members stood beside her, along with a man I hadn't seen before. Mid-40s, construction boots, clipboard in hand, contractor. I didn't walk up to them, didn't announce myself. I stayed back, just far enough to observe without being part of the scene. Patricia gestured toward the path, speaking with the kind of confidence that only comes from believing no one will challenge you. The contractor nodded, made notes, measured something with his steps. That was the moment it shifted. Up until then, everything had been informal, quiet, deniable. Now it was being evaluated, planned, converted. I went back inside without a word. That evening, I sat on my porch again, same as before, watching the traffic move through like clockwork. But now, I wasn't just observing behavior. I was tracking patterns, timing, volume, peak hours, because if they were going to turn this into something official, I needed to know exactly when it mattered most. And it didn't take long to figure it out. Between 5:15 p.m. and 6:30 p.m., the flow was constant. Not just residents either. Delivery trucks, service vehicles, even rideshare drivers. The shortcut had spread beyond the neighborhood, which meant one thing. If this road disappeared, even temporarily, it wouldn't just inconvenience a few homeowners. It would disrupt an entire system. And systems don't like being disrupted. They react. Fast. The next development came 3 days later. I woke up to the sound of machinery, low at first, distant, then closer, more consistent. I stepped outside, and there it was. A small crew, 2 trucks, and a piece of equipment smoothing out the path like it had been scheduled weeks in advance. No announcement, no notice, just action. I walked a little closer this time. Not enough to engage, just enough to be seen. One of the workers glanced at me, then looked away quickly. That told me everything. They knew. Maybe not details, maybe not ownership, but they knew this wasn't something they were supposed to question. Orders came from somewhere else. And around here, that somewhere else had a name, Patricia. By midday, the difference was clear. The path wasn't just a path anymore. It had edges, defined lines, even a slight curve adjustment near the tree line, subtle but intentional, optimized for flow. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how far it had gone without a single conversation. No permission, no negotiation, just assumption, layered on top of assumption, until it started looking like authority. That afternoon, I found something new. Mail this time, inside the box. Official envelope, HOA seal. I opened it slowly, already knowing the tone before I read a single word. Community infrastructure update. They didn't even pretend anymore. According to the letter, the temporary emergency access route had proven beneficial for overall traffic efficiency and resident convenience. Because of this, the board was exploring options to formalize the route as a permanent secondary access road. Exploring. That word does a lot of work. It sounds harmless, flexible, optional, but in reality, it means the decision is already made. They're just figuring out how to present it. I read the rest carefully. Mentions of community benefit, improved emergency response times, enhanced property value through better accessibility. All the usual language, all designed to make it sound like opposing it would be unreasonable, selfish even. I folded the letter, set it down, and just sat there for a minute. Then I smiled again, because they'd finally said it, not directly, but clearly enough. This wasn't temporary anymore. This was becoming permanent, exactly what I wanted. That evening, I took another walk along the path. This time, I didn't hide it. I walked right beside the road, slow, deliberate, letting every passing driver see me. Some avoided eye contact, some glanced briefly, then looked away. But a few looked confused, like something didn't add up. Good. Confusion is the first crack. Near the far end of the path, I noticed something new. Paint markings. Faint, but visible. Utility lines. Planning marks. The kind you put down before more serious work begins. That's when I realized we were entering the next phase. Infrastructure. They weren't just improving the surface anymore. They were preparing to legitimize it. Drainage, paving, possibly even lighting. And once that happened, reversing it would become exponentially harder, more expensive, more disruptive, which meant more resistance from everyone, exactly the position Patricia wanted. I stopped walking, stood there for a moment, and looked down the length of what used to be untouched land. Now it was a route. Soon, it would be a road. And everyone was already acting like it was inevitable. That's the dangerous part about gradual change. People stop questioning it. They adapt, accept, defend it, even if it started wrong. I turned around, headed back toward the house, already running through the next steps in my head. Because up until now, I'd been letting them build, letting them invest, letting them commit. But there's a point in every situation like this, where observation turns into preparation, and preparation turns into timing. They thought they were creating leverage, volume, dependency, and they were right. They just didn't realize. It wasn't going to work in their favor, because the more they built, the more they relied on it, the more people used it, the harder it would hit when it was gone. And I wasn't interested in stopping construction halfway. I wasn't interested in arguing over notices or attending HOA meetings. No, I wanted them to go all the way, to fully believe it was theirs, to invest time, money, reputation into it. So when the moment came, they wouldn't just lose a shortcut, they'd lose control. And control was the one thing Patricia Vaughn valued more than anything else, which meant taking it away would hurt exactly the way it needed to. So I went back inside, closed the door, and started getting ready, not to stop them, but to finish this properly. By the third week, It stopped feeling like something temporary. Not just to them, to everyone. That's how these things take root, not through permission, but through repetition. If people do something long enough without being stopped, they stop seeing it as something they shouldn't do, and start seeing it as something they're allowed to do. And that shift? That's where control changes hands. The road, because that's what it was now, whether anyone said it out loud or not, had become part of the community's routine. Morning traffic flowed through it without hesitation. Evenings were worse. There was no longer a main road and a shortcut. There was just the fastest way home, and it ran straight through my land. I started noticing details that most people wouldn't. Small things, the kind that tell you how permanent something is becoming. Trash bins had been repositioned by residents to face the new route. A couple of houses had adjusted their landscaping, opening side fences, clearing bushes, making it easier to access the path. Someone even added a reflective marker near a bend, not HOA issued, just a resident taking initiative. That was the moment it clicked. It wasn't just Patricia anymore. The community had bought in. That made things more complicated, but also more effective. Because when something collapses that people rely on, they don't just get annoyed, they panic. And panic spreads faster than logic. I didn't interfere, not even when the next step happened, because I knew it was coming. It started early one morning. I heard the trucks before I saw them. Heavier this time, louder, more deliberate. When I stepped outside, there were 3 vehicles parked along the edge of the path. 2 were clearly construction-related. The third? Marked. Municipal. That was new. That was important. I walked closer, not hiding it this time. No reason to. At this stage, visibility wasn't a risk. It was a message. One of the workers looked up as I approached, then quickly looked down again. Another one avoided eye contact completely. But the man standing near the marked vehicle? He didn't. He watched me, calm, evaluating. I stopped a few feet away, close enough to be part of the scene, but not initiating anything, letting him decide. He didn't speak, didn't introduce himself, just nodded once, like acknowledging presence without inviting conversation. That told me 2 things. First, he knew I was the property owner. Second, he didn't want a conversation on record, which meant whatever they were doing wasn't as official as it looked. That's the problem with borrowed authority. It looks real until someone asks the right question. I didn't ask. Not yet. Instead, I stood there for a few seconds longer, then turned and walked away. Because silence makes people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people make mistakes. By midday, the work was obvious. Gravel, fresh, evenly spread, compacted. The path had officially crossed the line from improved dirt to structured surface. Not paved, not permanent, but enough to signal intent. This wasn't maintenance anymore. This was development, and development means budget, planning, approval, at least on paper, which meant somewhere there were documents, maybe incomplete, maybe manipulated, but they existed, and that's all I needed. That afternoon, Patricia came by, not alone, of course not. 2 board members again, and the same contractor from before. This time, they didn't stay at a distance. They walked the length of the road, discussing, pointing, measuring, acting like owners. I watched from my porch, didn't move, didn't approach, just sat there, visible, calm, uninterested. And eventually, Patricia noticed. Of course she did. People like her always do. She stopped mid-conversation, turned slightly, and looked directly at me. Not surprised, not concerned, just assessing. Like she was trying to figure out whether I was going to be a problem. I held her gaze, didn't nod, didn't react, just watched. After a few seconds, she turned back to her group and kept talking. Decision made. In her mind, I wasn't a threat. That was exactly what I wanted. Because the most effective move in a situation like this is letting the other side underestimate you. That evening, something changed again. It wasn't the road this time. It was the narrative. I heard it for the first time while walking past one of the neighboring houses. 2 residents talking near their driveway. Honestly, it's about time they did something with that land. I slowed slightly. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough to hear. Yeah, I mean, it was just sitting there anyway. This makes way more sense. I kept walking. didn't interrupt, didn't correct them, because correcting them wouldn't change anything. Their minds were already made up. Unused land, in their eyes, was wasted land. And wasted land becomes opportunity, especially for people like Patricia. That's how justification spreads, quietly, casually, until it becomes consensus. And once it becomes consensus, it becomes pressure. Not just on me, but on anyone who might question it. I went back home, sat down, and started mapping things out. Not physically, mentally. Timeline, progression, investment. They'd already crossed multiple points of no return. Public usage normalized. Physical changes made. Contractors involved. Municipal presence introduced. And now, community support building, which meant we were getting close, not to the end, but to the point where intervention would cause maximum disruption. That's the key most people miss. It's not about stopping something. It's about stopping it at the right moment. Too early, and they recover. Too late, and it's permanent. But right in the middle, that's where systems break. And this was almost there. Before heading to bed, I stepped outside one more time. The road was quiet, empty, almost peaceful, if you ignored what it really was. I walked along the edge slowly, taking it in. The gravel, the curve, the way it connected two points that were never meant to be connected. Efficient, clean, completely wrong, and completely accepted, for now. I stopped near the center, looked down the stretch, and imagined it full. Cars lined up, engines running, people impatient, expecting movement, expecting access, expecting control. That image stayed with me, because that's where this ends. Not in a meeting, not in a letter, but in a moment. A very specific moment, where everything they built, everything they relied on, everything they assumed would always be there, stops, all at once. And when that happens, they won't be dealing with me. They'll be dealing with everyone else, which is exactly how I want it. I turned back toward the house, already knowing what needed to happen next. They were almost finished building their road, and I was almost ready to take it away. By the 4th week, the road stopped pretending to be temporary. They didn't announce it. They didn't need to. Everything about it, how it looked, how it was used, how people talked about it, had already crossed that line. And the HOA? They finally said it out loud. The email came late in the afternoon. Subject line: Community Access Improvement Proposal. Not emergency access anymore. Not temporary. Improvement. That's how they reframed it. I opened it, already knowing what I'd find. Polished language. Clean formatting. Carefully chosen words designed to make it sound like progress instead of overreach. According to the email, the HOA board, led by Patricia Vaughn, was proposing to formally designate the access route as a secondary internal road. Permanent, recognized, integrated into the community's infrastructure. They even included a rough layout, a map. And that was where it got interesting, because the map didn't show my land the way my documents did. It was adjusted, subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice, but clear enough to someone who had spent hours studying the original surveys. They had shifted the boundary line, not drastically, just enough to make the road appear like it sat on a shared easement corridor, which didn't exist, not legally, not historically, but on paper, on that map, it looked real. That's how these things happen. You don't take land outright. You redraw it. Then you present the new version confidently enough that people stop questioning the old one. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen for a long moment, because this was the first real move. Everything before this had been behavior. This was documentation, which meant they were committing. And once people commit something to paper, they start defending it. Hard. The rest of the email followed the usual pattern. Benefits, efficiency, emergency response improvement, property value increase. And then, at the bottom, community feedback is encouraged prior to final approval. Encouraged, not required. I almost laughed, because by the time something like this reaches feedback stage, the outcome is already decided. The meeting was just a formality, a chance to make it look democratic. I didn't respond, didn't send feedback, didn't raise objections, because again, too early. That night, I took another walk. This time, the road felt different. Not physically, but psychologically. There's a shift that happens when something unofficial becomes proposed official. People start treating it differently, more confidently, more aggressively, and that's exactly what I saw. Cars weren't just using the road, they were owning it. Faster speeds, less caution, more volume, and something else, expectation. I noticed it at the intersection point where the shortcut connected back to the main road. Drivers didn't slow down anymore. They merged, like they had right of way, like this was part of the system. That's when I knew we were close, very close. The next morning confirmed it. Survey stakes, bright orange, placed along the edges of the road, precise, measured, permanent markers for future work. That meant one thing. They were preparing for paving. Once asphalt goes down, everything changes. Costs go up. Reversing it becomes a legal battle instead of a simple correction. And Patricia knew that, which meant she was pushing toward a point of no return, fast. I walked the length of the road again, this time paying attention to every detail. Distances, widths, entry points, exit flow. Because if I was going to shut this down properly, I needed to understand exactly how it functioned at peak capacity, and more importantly, where it was most vulnerable. It didn't take long to figure that out. There was a narrow section near the center, right where the land dipped slightly before rising again toward the exit point. It wasn't obvious. Most people wouldn't notice it, but structurally, it was the weakest point, the place where blocking access would create the most disruption, not just inconvenience, gridlock. Because cars entering from both sides wouldn't see it until it was too late, and once they were committed, there'd be no easy way out. I stood there for a moment, just visualizing it. Traffic building, cars lining up, engines idling, people getting impatient, then frustrated, then angry, all because something they depended on was suddenly gone. That image? It was getting clearer, and so was the timing. That afternoon, I finally saw something I'd been waiting for. Equipment. Real equipment. The kind you don't bring in unless you're about to commit fully. Paving prep machines, parked near the entrance, covered, waiting. They weren't working yet, but they were ready, which meant the decision had already been made. The proposal? Just a delay tactic, a formality. Patricia wasn't asking for approval. She was creating the illusion of it. And the community? They were going along with it. Because by now, they needed the road. I started hearing it more often. Casual conversations. People mentioning how much time it saved, how convenient it was, how it should have been done years ago. That last one always stood out, because it implied something dangerous, that it was inevitable, that it was always supposed to happen. And anything that feels inevitable becomes very hard to challenge, unless you break it completely. That evening, something else happened. A small sign appeared near the entrance. Clean, official looking. Future road development, authorized by HOA board. No mention of property ownership, no mention of permissions, just authority, declared, displayed, accepted. I walked up to it slowly, stood there, and read it twice. Then I looked down the road, cars moving through it like nothing could ever stop them. And for the first time since this started, I felt it. Not anger, not frustration, something else, clarity, because everything was finally in place. They had public dependency, physical infrastructure, community support, visual authority, planned expansion, all of it built on something they didn't own, which meant when it collapsed, it wouldn't be quiet, it wouldn't be contained, it would spread, fast, and it would land exactly where it needed to, on Patricia, on the board, on the system they built without permission. I turned away from the sign, walked back toward the house, and went inside without another glance. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Because the decision had already been made, not by them, by me. They were going to finish this road. They were going to push it right up to the edge of permanence. And then, at the exact moment when it mattered most, I was going to take it away. Not partially, not temporarily, completely. And when I did, they wouldn't have time to react, only to deal with the fallout. And that was the part I was looking forward to. Because chaos doesn't need much to start, just one interruption. At the right place, at the right time. And I already knew exactly where that would be, and when. By week 5, the road wasn't just accepted, it was expected. People didn't think about it anymore. They didn't question it. They didn't even notice it in the way you stop noticing something once it becomes part of your daily routine. It was just there, like it had always been. And that was exactly the problem. Because the more something feels permanent, the more damage it causes when it suddenly isn't. The paving started on a Tuesday morning. No announcement, no final vote, no confirmation email, just trucks, heavy ones, lined up along the entrance like they had every right to be there. I watched from a distance as the crew got to work, grinding, leveling, laying the base, everything efficient, organized, pre-planned. This wasn't rushed. This wasn't reactive. This had been scheduled long before that proposal email ever went out, which meant Patricia hadn't just crossed the line. She had erased it and replaced it with something she expected no one to challenge. By midday, the difference was undeniable. Half the road had already been covered in fresh asphalt. Dark, smooth, permanent. Cars were still using it, even while work was being done. That's how normalized it had become. People were weaving around cones, slowing slightly, then accelerating again like nothing about this was unusual. I stood there for a moment, just watching it happen. Not angry, not surprised, just taking it in. Because this was the final stage. Once the asphalt was complete, everything would change. Legally, financially, psychologically. And that's exactly why I let it continue. By the end of the day, the entire stretch was done, from one end of my property to the other. A complete road, clean edges, defined entry points, even painted guidelines starting to appear. It was efficient, impressive even, if you ignored the fact that it didn't belong there. That evening, the traffic was heavier than I'd ever seen it. People testing it, enjoying it, some even driving slower, like they were appreciating the upgrade. I caught a few conversations as I walked near the edge. Finally feels like a real road. Should have done this years ago. It's going to raise property values for sure. That last one again. Always that one. Because once people believe something benefits them financially, they defend it harder than anything else. And Patricia knew that, which is why she didn't just build a road. She built justification, layer by layer, until no one wanted to question it. That night, another email came through. Short, direct. Roadway improvement completed. Final review and designation pending. Pending. That word again. Always just enough uncertainty to make it sound like a process, while everything already exists in reality. I didn't respond, didn't react, because now everything I needed was in place. The road was complete. The community relied on it. The HOA had publicly committed to it. And most importantly, peak usage had stabilized. Every system has a rhythm, a predictable pattern of demand. And this one, it was consistent. Morning rush, evening rush. Weekends slightly lighter, but still active. But there was one window that stood out more than any other. Friday evening, between 5:30 p.m. and 6:45 p.m. Maximum traffic, maximum dependency, maximum pressure. That was the moment. Not because it would cause inconvenience, but because it would cause collapse. Because at that time, people weren't just using the road. They needed it to get home, to stay on schedule, to avoid delays. Take that away, suddenly, without warning, and the reaction wouldn't be calm. It would be immediate, emotional, uncontrolled, exactly what I wanted. The next step wasn't complicated, but it required precision. I spent the next 2 days preparing, not publicly, not visibly, quietly. I revisited the property boundaries, confirmed every measurement, every legal line, every inch that belonged to me. Because once this happened, there would be no room for doubt, no gray area, no misunderstanding, just facts, clear, documented, unavoidable. Then I arranged what I needed. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal, just effective, simple barriers, positioned correctly, placed strategically, at the exact point where disruption would spread the fastest. That narrow dip in the middle of the road, the choke point, the place where stopping movement would create pressure from both sides. I didn't install anything yet. I didn't block anything, because timing mattered more than preparation. Too early, and they'd adjust. Too obvious, and they'd interfere. No, this had to happen clean, fast, decisive. The day before Friday, I saw Patricia again, standing near the entrance, watching cars move through the newly paved road, arms crossed, satisfied. That was the word, satisfied. Like someone who had just completed a project exactly the way they intended. No resistance, no consequences, just results. I walked past her without stopping. Didn't look, didn't acknowledge, but I could feel it, that sense of control, that quiet confidence. She believed this was done, finished, untouchable. And in a way, she was right, because at this stage, most people wouldn't even try to stop it. Too much effort, too many people involved, too much backlash. But I wasn't most people, and I wasn't interested in stopping it halfway. I was interested in ending it completely. That night, I went over everything one last time. The timing, the placement, the reaction. Because once it started, there would be no pause, no adjustment, no second attempt. It would happen once, and it would land exactly how it needed to. Friday came quietly, like any other day. No signs, no warnings, just routine. Morning traffic moved as expected. People used the road like they always did. No hesitation, no awareness, which is exactly how I needed it. Because the best disruptions are the ones no one sees coming. I stayed inside most of the day, not watching, not pacing, just waiting. Because patience is what made this work. Letting them build, letting them invest, letting them depend, all of it leading to this moment. By late afternoon, I stepped outside. The road was already active, cars moving steadily, volume increasing, right on schedule. I walked slowly toward the center, toward that narrow section, the choke point. And for a moment, I just stood there, watching, listening. Engines, tires on asphalt, the low hum of something that had become normal. Then I looked down the length of it, both directions, traffic building, flow tightening, exactly where it needed to be. I checked the time, 5:28 p.m., almost perfect. I took a breath, not because I was nervous, but because I knew this was it. Everything they built, everything they assumed, everything they depended on was about to stop. Not gradually, not politely, all at once. I turned, walked back toward the edge, and reached for the first barrier. And that's when it began. The first barrier went down in less than 10 seconds. No noise, no announcement, no hesitation. Just a clean, deliberate movement, positioned exactly where it needed to be. Right at the narrow dip, the choke point. I didn't rush. That's important. Rushing creates attention, and attention, at the wrong moment, gives people time to react. I placed the second barrier just as smoothly, then the third. Not across the entire road, just enough to block forward movement, just enough to force a stop, from both directions. At first, nothing happened. Cars were still moving, still flowing, because the ones closest hadn't reached the point yet, but I could see it coming. The first vehicle slowed, a silver sedan. Brake lights flickered, then stayed on. It rolled forward another few feet, then stopped completely. Behind it, another car slowed, then another. Within seconds, the entire forward line compressed, like a chain tightening. On the opposite side, it took slightly longer, but the result was the same. Momentum interrupted, flow broken. And once flow breaks in a confined space like that, everything else follows. I stepped back, not far, just enough to be out of the direct path, visible, but not obstructing, because now the reaction phase begins. The driver in the sedan opened his door first, looked ahead, confused, then annoyed. He walked a few steps forward, saw the barriers, and turned around, raising his hand slightly in frustration. "What is this?" No one answered, because no one understood yet. That's the thing about sudden disruption. It creates a gap between event and understanding. And in that gap, frustration grows. Fast. Within a minute, both sides were fully backed up. Cars lined up, engines idling, people stepping out, voices starting to overlap. Some tried to reverse, but there wasn't enough space. Too many cars had already committed. Too many had followed the pattern they'd been using for weeks. And now, they were stuck inside it, exactly as expected. I stayed where I was, calm, silent, watching, because this part had to play out naturally. No explanation, no announcement, just consequence. A man in a pickup truck tried to move one of the barriers. He stepped forward, grabbed it, and paused, because that's when he saw it, the line. Not painted, not marked, but understood, the edge of my property. And just beyond it, something else. Documentation, posted, clear, visible, unmissable. Property boundary notice, survey reference, legal identification. Everything placed where it needed to be, at the exact moment it would matter most. He let go of the barrier, stepped back, looked around, and for the first time, the confusion started turning into something else. Realization. Not complete, not yet, but enough. More people started walking forward, looking, reading, whispering. What does that mean? Is this private? Wait, can they even do this? The questions started spreading faster than the answers, and that's when the pressure shifted. Because up until now, this was just an inconvenience, a blockage, a delay. But once people start questioning legitimacy, it becomes something bigger, a problem. one that needs someone to blame. I checked the time again, 5:36 p.m., right on schedule. Peak flow had been hit, maximum density achieved, and now, maximum disruption. Perfect. The first horn sounded, short, sharp, impatient, then another, then a series of them, not coordinated, just emotional. People reacting the only way they know how when control is taken away. Noise, movement, frustration, but none of it changed anything, because there was nowhere to go. Forward was blocked, backward was crowded, side exits didn't exist. The system had locked itself, and I hadn't said a single word. That's the part most people miss. I didn't cause chaos, I removed access. The chaos was already built into the system, they just hadn't seen it yet. A woman stepped out of her car a few vehicles back, phone in hand, already calling someone, probably the HOA, maybe even Patricia directly. Good, that's exactly how this spreads, not from the center, but from the edges, outward, faster than any single person can control. Within minutes, more people were on their phones, voices rising, explanations failing, because no one had the full picture, and without a clear explanation, people create their own. That guy blocked the road. Is this even legal? They just paved this. Someone call the board. Pieces of truth, mixed with assumptions, building into something louder, more urgent. I stayed where I was, still, unmoved, because now, the only thing left was escalation. And escalation always brings authority. Not real authority, perceived authority. The kind Patricia relied on. The kind that only works until it's challenged. I saw the first HOA vehicle arrive around 5:42 p.m. Marked, recognizable. It didn't get far, stopped behind the line of cars like everything else, which meant whoever was inside had to walk. And that changes things. Because walking into a situation like this, without control, without clarity, without dominance, is very different from pulling up and taking over. The driver stepped out, looked ahead, then started moving forward, quickly, purposefully, trying to regain something that was already gone. By the time he reached the center, the noise had built into something louder, more chaotic, more demanding. What's going on? Why is this blocked? You need to fix this now. He raised his hands, tried to calm people down, but it didn't work, because calming people requires answers, and he didn't have any, not yet. Then he saw me, standing near the edge, not speaking, not reacting, just present. He walked over, fast. Sir, you need to remove these barriers immediately. Direct, authoritative tone, practiced. I looked at him for a second, then past him, at the road, at the cars, at the people waiting, then back at him, calm, measured. And for the first time since this started, I spoke. This is private property. That's all I said. Nothing more. No explanation, no argument, just a fact. Simple, clear, unavoidable. He hesitated, just for a second, but that second was enough, because doubt, once it appears, spreads, fast. Behind him, people started hearing it, repeating it. Private property? Wait, what? No way. The narrative shifted again, from frustration to confusion to something much more dangerous. Accountability. Because if this wasn't supposed to be here, if this wasn't allowed, if this whole thing had been built without permission, then the problem wasn't the barrier. The problem was everything that came before it. And that doesn't stay contained. That moves upward, toward the people who made the decision, toward Patricia. And I could already feel it, the moment tipping, the control shifting. Because for the first time since this started, they weren't dealing with a quiet observer. They were dealing with a fact they couldn't ignore, and a situation they couldn't control. And this was just the beginning. The moment I said it, this is private property, everything shifted. Not instantly, but noticeably. You could feel it in the way the noise changed. Before, it was frustration, impatience, people annoyed at being delayed. Now, it was something else, uncertainty. And uncertainty makes people uncomfortable, especially when they realize they might have been wrong. The HOA guy standing in front of me, mid-30s, polo shirt, badge clipped to his belt, didn't respond right away. He looked past me, at the barriers, at the posted boundary notice, then back at the road behind him, packed with cars, people stepping out, voices rising. He wasn't in control anymore, and he knew it. "Sir," he said again, but this time slower, less confident. "This is a community access road. You can't just block it like this." I didn't move, didn't raise my voice, didn't argue. I just looked at him and said, "It's not a community road." Simple, flat, no emotion. That's the thing about facts. You don't need to decorate them. Behind him, someone spoke up louder this time. "Then why have we been using it for weeks?" Another voice followed. "Yeah, they just paved this. Who approved it?" And just like that, it started turning. Not toward me, toward them, the HOA. Because people can tolerate inconvenience. They can even tolerate confusion, but they don't tolerate being misled. And right now, that's exactly what it felt like. The HOA guy turned slightly, trying to address the crowd. "There's been a proposal. This is under review." "Under review?" Someone cut him off. "We're driving on it right now." "Then why is it blocked?" Another voice snapped. He didn't have an answer, not a real one. Because there isn't a clean explanation for something that shouldn't have happened in the first place. I checked the time again, 5:49 p.m. The traffic had doubled. Cars were now backed up beyond both entry points. People were getting out in clusters. Phones were up, recording, calling, sharing. Exactly how situations like this spiral. A woman near the front stepped forward, pointing toward the barriers. "So what? We're just stuck here? You need to move those." I didn't look at her, didn't engage, because this wasn't about convincing them. It was about letting them reach the conclusion themselves. And they were getting there. Fast. I could hear fragments of it now. Did they even get permission? This isn't right. They can't just build on someone's land. That last one spread the quickest, because it made sense. And once something makes sense, people latch onto it. The HOA guy stepped closer to me, lowered his voice. "This is creating a serious situation. We need to resolve this immediately." I nodded slightly. "I agree." He blinked, caught off guard, probably expected resistance, argument. Instead, I gave him agreement, just not the kind he wanted. "Then move the barriers," he said quickly. I shook my head once. "Remove the road." That landed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but directly. He stared at me for a second like he was trying to process whether I was serious. Behind him, someone heard it. "Remove the road?" Another voice echoed it. "They built it." More people turned, listening now, focused, because that wasn't a delay anymore. That was a problem, a big one. The kind that doesn't get solved in a few minutes, the kind that costs money, time, reputation. And suddenly, the pressure shifted completely. It wasn't about getting through anymore. It was about understanding how this even happened, which meant one thing: they needed Patricia. And right on cue, she arrived. Her car didn't make it far, stopped behind the line like everything else. But unlike the others, she didn't hesitate. She stepped out immediately, already on the phone, already moving forward with purpose. People noticed. Of course they did. Authority always draws attention in moments like this. Conversations paused, voices lowered. Eyes followed her as she made her way toward the center, and I watched her the entire time. Same posture, same confidence. But something was different, not visible to most, but clear to me. She hadn't expected this, not like this. When she finally reached us, the HOA guy stepped aside slightly. Relief, more than respect, passing control back to someone who was supposed to have it. "Daniel," she said, like this was a conversation we'd been having all along. Calm, controlled, measured. I didn't respond, just looked at her. She glanced at the barriers, then at the posted notice, then back at me. "You're creating unnecessary disruption." I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because of how predictable it was. "That depends," I said quietly. "On what?" she asked. "On who caused it." That paused her, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough, because hesitation in front of an audience like this matters a lot. She recovered quickly. Of course she did. People like Patricia always do. "This is a community improvement project," she said, raising her voice slightly so others could hear. "It benefits everyone." Murmurs followed. Some agreement, some doubt, but not certainty. Not anymore. "On my property?" I asked. Not loud, not aggressive, just clear. That was the crack. Because now the conversation had direction, and direction leads to questions, real ones. "You never objected," she said. There it was, the justification, the assumption, the foundation of everything she'd built. Silence equals consent. I nodded once. You never asked. That landed harder than anything else so far, because it reframed everything, not as a misunderstanding, but as a decision, a choice, made without permission, made deliberately. Behind Patricia, I could see it spreading again, people connecting the dots, replaying the last few weeks in their heads, the signs, the construction, the usage, all of it, suddenly questionable. This can be resolved, she said quickly, but not like this. She gestured toward the road, the cars, the growing crowd. This is already resolved, I replied. And that was the truth, because the moment those barriers went down, the outcome was set. All that was left was how they handled it. And from the look on her face, she was starting to realize that too. Around us, the noise had shifted again. Less shouting, more talking, more phones, more recording. This wasn't just a traffic issue anymore. It was an incident. And incidents don't stay local. They spread, fast. Call the city, someone said from behind. Another voice followed. Yeah, let's see what they say about this. That's when Patricia's expression changed. Subtle, but real. Because city involvement, that's a different level. That's where things stop being controlled internally, where documentation matters, where authority gets questioned. And right now, she didn't have the ground to stand on. Not legally, not visibly, not publicly. I didn't say anything else, didn't need to, because everything that needed to happen was already happening. The road was blocked, the people were watching, the story was spreading, and the control she had built so carefully over the past few weeks was slipping. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to change the outcome. And once that shift begins, there's no going back. By the time someone actually called the city, it was already too late to contain anything. That's the thing about situations like this. People think the turning point is when authorities get involved. It's not. The turning point is when control shifts, and that had already happened the moment those barriers went down. Everything after that, just confirmation. Patricia knew it. I could see it in the way she stopped trying to command the situation and started trying to manage it. That's a very different posture. Less authority, more damage control. This doesn't need to escalate, she said, lowering her voice again, stepping slightly closer to me. We can discuss this privately. I didn't move, didn't lean in, didn't match her tone. Should have done that before you built it. No anger, no emphasis, just a simple statement. Behind her, the crowd was growing more organized. Not calmer, organized. Groups forming, people comparing what they knew. Phones still up, some recording the road, some recording her, some recording me. Not because I was doing anything dramatic, but because I wasn't. And that contrast, it made everything louder. The HOA guy stepped back again, completely out of the conversation now. He wasn't equipped for this level. This wasn't enforcement. This was exposure. A man near the front raised his voice. So what happens now? Are we just stuck here? Another one added, yeah, someone needs to fix this. Now. That word again, fix. People always want a quick fix, even when the problem was built slowly. Patricia turned toward them, trying to reclaim control. We're working on resolving this. Resolve it how? Someone cut in. By moving the barriers? Another voice followed. All eyes shifted back to me. Expectation, pressure, demand. I didn't respond, didn't move, because this wasn't my problem to fix. That's the part people misunderstand. They assume the person who stops something is responsible for what happens next, but that only applies when the system was valid to begin with. This one wasn't. So the responsibility stayed exactly where it belonged, with the people who built it. Minutes passed. 15, maybe 20. Hard to tell exactly. Time stretches in moments like this. Traffic wasn't moving at all now. Engines were off in some cars. Doors open. People standing in clusters. The road, their road, completely unusable. And the longer it stayed that way, the heavier it became. Not physically, socially, financially, reputationally. That's when the second wave arrived. Not HOA this time. City. 2 vehicles, marked clearly. They didn't try to push through. Couldn't. They parked at the edge and walked in, just like everyone else, which immediately changed the atmosphere. Because now, this wasn't internal anymore. This wasn't HOA territory. This was outside oversight. And Patricia knew exactly what that meant. 2 officials approached. one older, one younger, both calm, both observant. They didn't start by asking questions. They looked at the road, at the barriers, at the posted boundary notice, at the crowd. Then, finally, at Patricia. "You in charge here?" the older one asked. She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but it was there. "Yes," she said, confident, controlled, but not as solid as before. He nodded once. "Whose road is this?" Simple question, direct, no room to maneuver. She opened her mouth slightly, then paused, because there wasn't a clean answer, not one she could say out loud, in front of everyone, with everything visible the way it was. "That's what we're trying to clarify," she said. Careful, neutral, but not convincing. The older official shifted his gaze to me. "And you?" "Daniel Cross," I said. "Property owner." Again, simple, clear, no explanation needed. He nodded slowly, then looked back at the road, then at the barriers, then at the boundary notice again. You could almost see the conclusion forming in real time. "This paved recently?" he asked. "Last few days," I replied. He let out a short breath, not quite a sigh, but close. Then he turned back to Patricia. "You have permits for this?" Silence. Not long, but long enough. "No," she said finally. Quiet, measured, but audible. And that was it. That was the moment everything collapsed. Because up until then, there was still ambiguity, still room for interpretation. Now, there wasn't. No permits, private land, public use, documented, visible, irrefutable. The reaction wasn't loud, not immediately. It was worse than that. It was quiet. That kind of quiet where people process something all at once. And then, the noise came back, but different this time. Not confusion, not frustration. Anger, directed, focused. "Wait, you built this without permits? On his land? You've been letting us drive through this?" Questions turned into accusations, fast. And Patricia? She didn't answer. Couldn't, because anything she said now would only make it worse. The older official raised his hand slightly, signaling for some calm. "This needs to be shut down," he said. Clear, authoritative, final, immediately. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at her, because he knew exactly where the responsibility sat. With proper review to follow. That was the official version, the structured version. But everyone already understood what it meant. The road was done. Not completed. Done. Finished. Over. The younger official stepped aside, already speaking into his radio. Arrangements, next steps, containment, all the things that come after a mistake becomes public. I didn't say anything else. Didn't need to. Because everything I had planned, everything I had waited for, everything I had let them build, had reached its conclusion. Not through force, not through argument, but through timing. Patricia looked at me one last time. Different now. No confidence, no control, just calculation, trying to figure out how much damage had been done, and how much worse it could get. I held her gaze for a moment, then looked past her, at the road, at the cars, at the people. All of it stopped, exactly where it was, exactly how I imagined it. Because in the end, I didn't need to fight them. I didn't need to out-argue them. I just needed to let them build something they couldn't defend, and then take it away. At the exact moment it mattered most, the barriers stayed where they were, the road stayed empty, and the system they created collapsed under its own weight. I turned, walked back toward my house, and didn't look back, because for me, it was already over.